Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the other type of loops, which is the while loops. Right? So let's review what we found out for for loops. So for for loops, you can automatically tell within the loop structure how often something runs. So for instance, this 5 right here inside of the range lets me know that this loop is going to run 5 times. What does that mean? That means that the indented block here, which is in line 2, so you could have a number of indented blocks or you can have just a single one like we have here, but the indented block, which is part of the for loop, will be executed 5 times. So each time through the loop, the I variable here will keep count. It'll say, okay, you've gone through once, you've gone through twice, and so on. And after it's gone through 5 times, it will terminate the loop. And after each time, during each loop, it will be printed, high will be printed 5 times. A while loop is not like that. We can't automatically tell in a while loop how many times it's going to run just by using the first part of the while loop, where it's defined right here. So we're going to use a tool called Python Tutor in order to visualize what's happening with this while loop. So I have count equals 0, while count less than 5, print the count is, and then also print the count. And then to the count, add 1 and give it back to count. And then at the end of the loop, after the loop has been terminated, the line 5 will print off goodbye. So I'm going to go forward here, and it's going to tell me, this program will step through the program that I have one step at a time. So here it's going to say, or one line at a time rather, while count is 0, is less than 5. Well, I've had to initiate count in line 1 in order for count to be read as 0. Otherwise, it wouldn't know what I was talking about when I reached this line right here. So it looks back, it finds the variable named count, it recognizes that the value currently for count is 0. 0 is less than 5, so it continues on the loop. Okay, so the next thing it's going to do is it gets to this line right here, and it says the count is, and since the count is 0, it prints what the current count is. Now for line 4, when I press forward, you'll see it being executed because this changed from 0 to 1. Okay? Now, since the count is 1 and 1 is less than 5, when I say forward, it will continue to run the indented blocks. It's going to print the count is 1, then it's going to add 1 to the count to make it 2. Now, since 2 is less than 5, we'll continue with the indented blocks. The count is 2, the count becomes 3. It wraps around to check what the count is, to check if the condition here is met. It is true that 3 is less than 5, so it will go forward. Okay, the count is 3, it adds 1 to the count to make it 4. 4 is still less than 5, so it prints the count is 4. Then at this point, when I execute this line, watch this count right here, it becomes 5. Now 5 is not less than 5. So at this point, it is going to jump past the indented blocks to get to line 5 to print goodbye, because it is no longer true that the count is less than 5. So it will stop running the indented blocks inside of the loop. All right, and so it will just say goodbye. That's how a while loop works, okay? So basically the syntax for a while loop is a little bit, the beginning syntax, the while condition, is simpler than the for loop, where you don't have to put a range of values in there. You literally just say while a condition is true. So what you're checking on is, it's a Boolean statement. Sometimes it's a comparison of 2 numbers. Sometimes we're gonna see in a code along later on that you can check to see if a string is equal to a certain value. But it's a Boolean condition that you can check, and it can be evaluated to be true or false. While age is less than 18, charge them this ticket price. While age is greater than 25, give them a discount. So whatever it is, it can be checked to be true or false. And if the condition is true, then the indented blocks of code are going to be run. So in other words, it will be repeated as long as the condition is true. And then it checks at the beginning of each loop, it'll check again that if the condition is true or false. Okay, so loops like both for and while have iteration variables, and we talked about this before, that change each time through the loop. Often these iteration variables go through a sequence of numbers. So for this one, I is equal to 0. We're gonna look at the first couple sequences here. So the iteration variable in the while loop is I in this situation. unlike the iteration variable in the for loop, I have to define the iteration variable before I start the while loop. So here I said I is equal to 0. That gives me a little bit more freedom because it doesn't always start at 0 like the for loop. So I can tell them whatever I want the variable to be equal to. And then at line 2, it checks 0 is less than 5. Since it is, it will run line 3. So it'll print out 0. Then this line 4 takes what the current value of I is, adds 1 to it, and changes it by 1 each time through the loop. So I becomes 1. Now it goes back up to check the condition. Well, since 1 is less than 5, it'll run the line 3 again. So it'll print now 1, okay? It printed 0 before, now it will print 1. Well, now it's going to take the previous value of I, 1, and add 1 to it to make it 2. It checks the condition, 2 is less than 5, and so on. So it prints out the indented block there, it adds 1 until it gets to a point where it is not, the condition's not true, and then it will stop. Okay? This is going to allow you to answer questions 1 through 4 right now. Okay, so let's talk about this loop right here. So I want to look at the idea of something inside of a loop and something outside of a loop. Okay, so we're going to, again, review this through Python Tutor. Here I give initial value of the iteration variable to be 5, and I say while n is greater than 0, print n, and then subtract 1 from n. Okay, so here, after line 1 is executed, n is set equal to 5. N is greater than 0, so as I move forward, it'll print 5, and then notice that n becomes 4. So each time through the loop, n reduces itself by 1. So 4 is greater than 0, it prints 4, it reduces n by 1 to make it 3, okay, and so on. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and then we get to n being equal to 1, that's still greater than 0, it'll print 1, and then it gets to n is equal to 0. So at this point, it jumps past the indented blocks and prints blast off, okay? So this is an example of a number being reduced by 1 each time until it gets to a certain position here. Okay, so let's look at the flowchart equivalent to the same, the for loop that we saw before. So the first line, the first thing that's executed is line 1, and that creates a variable called n, and it sets the value equal to 0. Now the second thing that's executed is line 2, and it checks the value of n against the value of 0. If n is greater than 0, if that's the yes, the branch goes down here, it prints off the current count, and it subtracts 1 from the count, and then it checks the condition again. So remember, it prints off these two, it executes these two blocks, and then it checks the condition. Now it keeps doing this until we get to the point where n is 0. And then at that point, when we say 0 greater than 0, the answer would be no, so it would run this other process block, print blast off and print final count. I actually probably should have put those as 2 process blocks there. After that, it stops the loop. So this is what the while loop looks like in the flowchart, right? So again, this is the same while loop. I accidentally put yes and no. I switched those around in this picture here, but it's the same while loop and the outcome of this, okay? Because notice I put a little emoji there. Okay, let's talk about this while loop right here. So this one has n is equal to 5, while n greater than 0, print rinse, lather, and then it checks again whether n is greater than 0. Now the outcome of this actually, this is from a different development environment here, but it says stopped after running 1,000 steps, more on next page. Okay, let's look at the flowchart to see what's happening with this while loop here. So the first line that's executed here is a creation of a variable called n and a setting equal to a value of 5. So create a variable n equal to 5. And then as it goes through the process block, it says, is n greater than 0? Well, n's 5, so it is greater than 0. So if the answer is yes, it prints rinse and then lather, and then it checks the condition again. Is n greater than 0? Well, n's 5, so n is greater than 0. So it goes through again. And then it says, okay, is n greater than 0? Well, n is 5, so n is greater than 0. Now what's happening here is that your block of your no condition is never being triggered. So this number 6 is never being triggered because there is no ability, n is not changing through the while loop. So the value of n is always 5, which means that this condition here is always true. Well, if it's always true, then it's going to continue to run indefinitely through this loop until you force the development environment to stop it. It means that this branch right here is never being triggered, which is the stop is located after the loop stops running and line 6 has been executed. So you have to be very careful with while loops, because there is, you can create a situation where they run like indefinitely. And if you make that situation, then it's really difficult, because some development environments, it makes some development environments crash. So the thing that you can check is, while you write your Boolean condition right here, make sure that eventually it can be determined to be true or false. Otherwise, your loop will run indefinitely. And like what we've seen in the password picker program, if you want to make sure your loop has some sort of pausing mechanism, you can always ask for an input at some point. Like in our password picker, it asked for, it used an input at the end of the loop, and it said, input, do you want another password? So the input function allows the while loop to pause. It allows any program to pause, and it waits for a user to respond. So that's a way to kind of put in a fail-safe in a while loop, just to make sure that it's not going to run indefinitely. Otherwise, just make sure that your iteration variable changes as you go through the loop. All right? And that's going to allow you to answer questions 5 through 10 right now. And that's it.